To me, deservingness feels like, no, I deserve what I want. I deserve what I feel. I deserve who I am, owning who I am and my authenticity and what my soul is asking for. That is magnetism, is authentic deservingness. From To Be Magnetic, this is the Expanded Podcast with your host, Lacy Phillips. As the leading destination for neural manifestation, we dispel the woo-woo in order to help you create real, tangible results based on neuroplasticity, psychology, epigenetics, and energetics. Our goal is to normalize the practice of manifestation and empower you to get into the driver's seat of your life in order to manifest the experiences, relationships, and things that most align with your authenticity. Part of our manifestation process entails expanding past your limiting subconscious beliefs. Therefore, by tuning into this podcast with interviews from experts, thought leaders, spiritual teachers, scientists, and those with neural manifestation success stories, you're starting the process of expanding your subconscious in order to see to believe that anything you desire is possible. And by pressing play, the process begins.
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Expanded. Jessica here. If you guys are tuning in to the podcast or have checked out our Instagram, you know we are deep in the Manifestation Challenge. That challenge is running from December into January to help you call in the next version of self right now. And we are in week 5 of the challenge. I hope you guys are noticing any patterns coming up, seeing what you're triggered in, able to move through them, utilizing the daily practice and really leaning on that. And it's never too late to start the challenge. We're going to have it in the Pathway portal for the month of January, so you can start new now. I think today and over the next few days is a great time to really take inventory of where you've grown this year. Look at all the places that you've overcome your fears and stepped into your self-worth and really honored yourself and cared for yourself and nurtured yourself in new ways. I think it's so important to check in and really take space to acknowledge all the beautifulness and blessings of the year, even though it might feel really challenging and difficult. Tapping into that can be really powerful as we go into the new year. So make sure to sign up for the Pathway for our lowest rate of the year. And the sale will be going on until midnight PST on the 31st, which is tonight. So check the show notes for a link to our sale code to get into the Pathway for one of our lowest rates of the year. That again is for new members and can't be applied retroactively. So wishing everyone many blessings and a Happy New Year. So excited to be connecting with you guys today. We have another one of our best and highest streaming episodes of 2021, and I know you guys are going to love this one. It is our Explained Self-Esteem and Worthiness, where Dr. Tara, Lacy, and I really dive into what is self-worth and what is deservingness and what are the energetics and how can we tap into that and what does it feel like to tap into that. I think it couldn't come in a more perfect time when we're ushering into the new year, thinking about the new version of self. I know you guys are going to love this episode. Enjoy and have a wonderful end of 2021 and happy 2022. Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Explained. We have Lacy and Dr. Tara here. I'm so excited for this theme. We're covering self-esteem and worthiness, which is really the pillar of manifestation. And I'll kick us off with a quote. You do not need people, attention, or validation in order to complete, balance, or fix you. This is the definition of self-esteem. This is such an interesting topic because self-esteem feels like one of those elusive terms where you're like, oh, I have self-esteem, I want this. It feels like something so intangible. And to really break it down in how we are building our self-esteem and sort of those pillars of that, I think are so fascinating. There's an author, Nathaniel Branden, who has a book, The 6 Pillars of Self-Esteem. And in that, he starts to say that really self-esteem is broken down to self-efficacy, which is the confidence to think, understand, learn, choose, make decisions, self-trust, reliance, and then self-respect. So assurance of your value, the right to live, to be happy, comforted, asserted for your thoughts, your wants, your needs, your birthright, your worthiness. And both of those together are self-esteem. Lacy, Dr. Tara, how do you guys define self-esteem, worthiness? How do you see it through a manifestation lens? And then Dr. Tara, how do you see it through a psychology, neuroscience lens?
I hadn't heard the definition as you just stated it, Jessica, but I really like that one because these words, self-respect, self-worth, self-esteem, they're used interchangeably. So it's really useful to break them down into these are the 5 or 6 things that it means. I did feel a bit like the second one sounded quite privileged in a way because, it actually includes the right to live. And there are obviously people whose lives are in danger. So it makes you sort of question how it relates there. Basically, self-esteem is how well you think of yourself. And it can be subconscious or conscious or both. But it leads to so many potentially good or issues like boundary issues. So to me, that one's really relevant here. And then it's interesting with self-respect because I know we're going to talk later about whether these can fluctuate throughout life. But I remember once a friend said to me, it's okay if your self-esteem is low because you've been through something, but if you lose your self-respect, you might not be able to get it back. And I think what that's about is if you do something or say something or even think something when you're in a bad place, you might not be able to forget that or undo what you've done. And that could have a consequence for the rest of your life. I'd love to get into a conversation about how the shame or guilt that can lead to, what we can do about that through DIs. But I think it's interesting that there's one that can ebb and flow through life and one that you don't want to cross a certain line.
Yeah, I think those are all really great points, and I can't wait to break down those with you later on. I think for manifestation purposes, the real conversation here is energetic. So, something that when we're talking as a brand about, I don't think we even actually use the term self-esteem too much. I used to long ago. We obviously use self-worth the most just because it lands. When I read energetics, it's kind of like keynotes in music, and self-worth lands like that perfect tone. But what lands even more as the undertone of it all is deservingness. That is magnetism, is authentic deservingness. And I would argue that many of us, through all of our different facets and walks of life and programming and pain and shame and culture, there's so many things that don't rob us of deservingness necessarily. For the majority, most of us struggle with deservingness more than we tend to naturally, innately emit that from our subconscious, especially. So when we're talking about magnetism as a brand, what attracts everything to you, literally that perfect keynote or frequency that's pulling everything to you is deservingness. And so when I think of self-esteem, which the definition is confidence in one's own worth and abilities, self-respect, that confidence piece is the deservingness piece. And I think a lot of people, especially in this current culture, can look at the word deservingness poorly. However, it's an energetic word that we're putting out there. So what I would invite people to do is disassociate any type of mal definition you have attached to it and really start to look at what does deservingness mean for me. And I think layers will start to show up regarding how you identify. If you identify, for instance, as a female, I think just societally alone, what deservingness can bring up for you if you just pull out a pen and paper and start journaling every association you have to that word. And even looking at those words that might come up for you, that's some shadow work to do. So that's like a great exercise somebody could do using the tools, is really going, at the root of all magnetism is authenticity and deservingness. Let me look at what I have associated to those two words. And then I can take those through. Literally, the fastest way is through the shadow, the inner child and shadow, deep imagining that we have in the daily practice. So that's what I'll kind of keep chiming in from an energetic perspective of manifestation. And when we say self-worth, I feel like that's a little bit more of a palatable word for people in the current climate. However, like the perfect note beneath it that is literally a magnet is deservingness.
I love the music analogy, and I agree, self-worth just lands better than those two words, although I think that definition that Jessica read out was really useful in terms of what does it actually mean in your day-to-day life. But can I just ask, Lacy, I want to be clear that I understand what the sort of mal, view on deservingness is. Did you mean entitlement?
Yeah, certainly, when we've posted about it in the past, people can be often activated by the word, that it could mean entitlement. Entitlement's really what I think it comes down to, like a form of that, and certainly the judgments we have of it. And when you look at deservingness from an energetic perspective, entitlement's a whole different can of worms. Entitlement, for instance, can come from, classism. It just can come from so many different variables that aren't authentic and integrated. Whereas if you really start to get rid of any of the bad connotation you have around deservingness, to me, deservingness feels like, no, I deserve what I want. I deserve what I feel. I deserve who I am, like really, really owning who I am and my authenticity and what my soul is asking for. So that's sort of, you hit it on the nose. That's certainly what the backlash has probably been around it, is certainly entitlement, which is not the same. Again, it's not the same note.
That's so interesting because I don't associate those two words like that at all. And I wondered if it's because it can be misinterpreted as deserving material things. And of course, manifestation can include material things, but you've just given your definition. And for me, it's I deserve to be happy. I deserve to follow my path in life. So yeah, it's not like I deserve a big house and a fancy car kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think anybody listening to just hearing this back and forth, like this is how I invite people to start reading their own energetics. What's coming up for you as you're listening, walking in the car, whatever you're up to listening to this, what's coming up for you when we talk about deservingness? What's your relationship to it? Because exactly what you just said, Dr. Tara, is the truth. And always when you're in that space, material things will follow no matter what, because we're on the material plane. But that's one thing that I love, because even hearing the word, again, like kind of using that music analogy, it's so perfect that I invite, this is such a great exercise for anybody listening. What's your personal relationship to deservingness, deserving what your soul desires, deserving your authenticity, deserving your soul's purpose? What is that? Is there some shadow attached to it?
Yeah. And I think one other distinction too of the negative connotation of deservingness is that oftentimes it's presented as an opposition. So one person's deserving and another person is not. Mm-hmm. And this version of deservingness is everyone's deserving.
Yes.
And I think that's a big difference, because so many times it's used as a power play against someone else. Well, I deserve this and you don't. And this is not that energetic at all. This is everyone is deserving.
And it's also about, whether you believe that there's a scarcity of resources or not. I agree, Lacy, that unblocked child could be quite a lot to do that. If you feel like the world is not a safe place, there's not enough, for everyone to go around, then saying I'm deserving makes it sound like I'm saying I want something. And it doesn't matter if that means that Lacy goes without something, but it's not that at all.
Not at all. And in fact, getting back to the energetic of it in general, it actually has nothing to do with anybody else whatsoever. But I know exactly what you guys are saying, that we have that attachment to it based on society and programming and what we've seen from the patriarchy, which I won't go deep into. But in fact, it's the deservingness energetic has really nothing to do with correlation of anybody else in your life. It's really completely connected to your own authentic self. So yeah, that's something that can be dropped right away, instantly, as a shadow, if you're listening.
I'm actually glad that you mentioned that, because I have some evidence. So I would like to pick up on that
Oh,
point,
great.
which is that, so there's evidence that shows that if you grew up in a very fear-driven culture, and by culture, it can mean your religion, your school, your family, your community. Culture means lots of different things. And examples of fear-driven cultures are patriarchies, and religiosity that is God-fearing rather than God as a loving entity. And what that leads to later, that's connected to worthiness, is this should mentality. I should have this kind of job. I should behave in this kind of way. And just the guilt that goes along with that for, well into adult life. I actually remember a psychotherapist friend saying to me, you get to an age where there's no should anymore. You're just doing what you're doing and it's fine. I think that's interesting because it really could be connected.
I love that. And that's one of the big reasons why we even added in Unblocked Money, the cultural portion to it, really looking at what you inherited from religion, what was culturally messaged to you, because that is such a big part. You just literally nailed that on the head. If you're feeling or experiencing either love or money, because the connection's so strong, blocks, not seeing what you want to come through, this is a really beautiful bridge to look at deservingness and the cultural programming that you grew up with. I love that you just pointed that out.
And I didn't even add that on brain scanning, you actually see differences in the thickness of the cortex of people that were brought up in fear-driven cultures compared to people who have that more sort of loving or spiritual or, connected upbringing.
I mean, we see that in real time with one of our employees. Wouldn't you agree, Jessica? One of our directors.
Oh, yeah.
She's like the most magnetic person ever. And she was literally grew up being told, you are an extension of God. You're pure love. There's no such thing as bad. And when I say bad, it means like sin and stuff like that. And I mean, you see it in real time. Effortlessly, she manifests most anything she wants into her life in different ways. It's crazy. And the coolest thing is what we're talking about. It's some effort. It takes the work and having a practice, but that's achievable for everybody. I mean, that's what integration is. So that's what this work is essentially doing for people. So when you're listening to this and you're like, oh man, I didn't grow up with that, that's okay. That's why we have the pathway for that exact reason. The entire reasoning for it is that integration, which again is coming back to deservingness, authenticity, like whole worthy authenticity, which I think would be at the root of self-esteem, this conversation.
Absolutely. I mean, I was going to say it's absolutely accelerated that for me. So
that sort of brings me to my next question too, which is like, is the self-esteem a stage of development for childhood? Does it start presenting at a certain period, or is it sort of forming throughout your life and then it is forever shifting? Because everything that I've read on it, your self-esteem can change all the time, which is really exciting because that means that you can grow your self-esteem and develop it and all of those things if you didn't grow up with that reinforcement as a child. So are people more soft-wired to have higher self-esteem? Is it nature versus nurture? What does that look like from a neuroscience perspective, Dr. Tara?
Yeah, so I think with neuroplasticity, well, first of all, I just want to reference the childhood stages of psychosocial development that we have, written into our workshops, and then say that with neuroplasticity, we often fall back on this line, which is that it's born and then it's made. And so there is likely a genetic element to this that we can't really completely ignore, but absolutely a massive nurture element. And that is throughout childhood. And even, there's a lot of evidence for how your experience in the womb contributes to your psychological profile later as well. So I would say that there's like a lower limit of self-esteem that you can't go below, but that baseline isn't going to be the same for everyone. Apart from that, you can do the work that helps it to increase over time. And of course, if something bad happens to you, it might dip for a while, but you'll be resilient to getting that back. There probably are some individual differences based both on nature and nurture, and that throughout all the childhood stages and even the adult development stages, it can change, and that you can do things to improve your baseline level of self-esteem.
I think this is also a good opportunity to just acknowledge that generational trauma likely plays a factor in that. Like if you have a family, that a family member was a survivor of the Holocaust or of slavery or some horrific event, there is a potential and likelihood for that to track genetically. And it is so possible to heal those aspects of yourself and integrate further.
Correct. So the first thing to say about that is that there tends to be an assumption with epigenetics that if there's been a trauma earlier in the generations, that the only impact of that down the generations is negative. It's not. We know that most of the work has been done on the Holocaust and the Dutch famine, that it can either lead to higher stress responses and anxiety, or it can lead to higher levels of resilience. So, it could be that across 3 generations or more, that the second generation were more anxious, but then you are higher in worthiness as some sort of result of that. So it's not a simple formula, but what I love about that is that you don't have to accept that if my grandparents were traumatized, that means I'm going to have lower worthiness. I don't have to accept that. And that's so wonderful. And the fact that neuroplasticity means that we can do something about that from the level of the DNA to just our mindset.
That's really comforting, I think, for a lot of people to hear, because it feels like, oh, well, all of this trauma and all this pain for so many generations, how am I going to escape that? But hearing that even from like the worthiness standpoint, you literally can, and start, reprogramming and changing your brain.
Something that I find so interesting, a podcast guest recently really talked about having the creative space to even change your reality, and what I mean by that is if you have the stresses of life, if, you're struggling paycheck to paycheck, job to job, single parent in general without any support, being able to carve out this space. I know for myself, I need aloneness to be able to co-create with the universe quite often, alone in my thoughts, alone in not having a lot of stress responses or even micro stress around. I have that privilege. What are your thoughts on that, Dr. Tara, or any studies you've read that might back this up? Having actual creative space in order to co-create with the universe, number one. And then secondly, any thoughts you have on how you can create that space if you are in any of the circumstances I just mentioned?
That's a really, really lovely question. So the thing about deservingness is, based on the fact that we've said that it can be cultivated, is that your choices basically are that you're so busy and distracted that you never do any of the actions that can cultivate it. So you're kind of left with your baseline level, or that you are able to create that space, whatever that may mean for you. So I think it's really interesting that you were so specific about yours, because I think it could be very different for other people. So for some people, it could be being in nature, but for some people, it could be absolutely having the family in the background, because that gives some sense of safety and security and achievement. But space is a good word, because when we're busy and focused all the time, and our brain is in what's called the control network, well, basically, we need to be at the opposite end of that, which is the default network, which is kind of like mind wandering, voluntary daydreaming. So not just your mind wandering off, but you actually taking the time to think about how you want your life to look or feel. And so then coming to the second part of that, which is if you're literally living from paycheck to paycheck, trying to put food on the table and, have children to look after and not much help, then it is, of course, harder. And that's kind of why I raised the slight issue that I felt about you've got to be somewhat privileged to have access to some of these things. But what I always say about that is, even in that scenario that you described, even just taking 5 minutes for yourself could make your life better. And so I suggest sort of micro tweaks for that. Things like a gratitude list, some journaling, some, reading some prompts and having some, just thinking about what your answer to that might be when you're in the bath or something. And, we particularly filtered the DIs to have short, medium and long ones, partly for that reason as well. So that if you really are short of time, you can at least do a short DI.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. And what would be some examples? Because I'm sure people listening are like, I wonder what my version of creating space is, and it doesn't necessarily have to be like the very moment that you're doing this work or anything, but that daydreamy state. What could be examples? Like how mine is being completely alone gives me that Aquarian space to do that. But yeah, what would be other examples maybe for other people? Like you were saying, an element can be in an environment that creates safety and normalcy for you.
So the classic examples that are based on evidence are in the bath or shower, and in the period of time just as you're falling asleep or just as you're waking up. So mentally, they are times where your brain goes into that zone. But equally, if you went for a walk in nature, you even just spent time with somebody who is a really good friend that you laugh with, that you resonate, that puts your brain into that bonded mode. Sometimes just having your sleeping baby in your arms could put you into that mode. So the classic ones people sort of know about, like in the bath or shower. And there's so many amazing stories of, the Beatles writing their lyrics in the shower, or eureka moments actually comes from the fact that a big scientific idea was thought of in the bath. So really what you're making me think of is the part in my book where I wrote about stepping back to set an intention. The fundamental problem is that we never step back. We just live our lives on autopilot. And that could be anything from 5 minutes to 2 hours to a weekend.
I think that's great. What does the neuroscience show right when you're falling asleep? You're in between. I would argue, maybe I'm crazy about this, but that's kind of the DI state that we're trying to take people to, and obviously overwrite old emotional associations to blocks. For the mom who doesn't have space and time, and is familiar with this work, is a pathway member, is familiar with different DIs and journal prompts, how could they utilize that time if they didn't get time that day to do the work?
I love this. And, one of the things I really like about you is that you're very, very well read and researched, but you never try to pretend to be an expert on the subject. And so you just said, maybe I'm crazy with this, but you're actually not. It's a recognized phenomenon called the Tetris effect. The state of going from being awake to falling asleep and being asleep to waking up are called the hypnagogic and hypnopompic states. So they're recognized separate states of consciousness to being awake or being asleep. And in the period from being awake to falling asleep, the last thing that you look at or think about imprints very strongly onto your subconscious. And the reason it's called the Tetris effect is because when kids played Tetris on their Game Boy in bed at night, when they switched it off and put it down and closed their eyes, they could still see the bricks falling in their mind's eye. So I would say a busy mom who, when she has time, does DIs, does journaling, but hasn't, let's say, managed to do anything today, could either, as they're falling asleep, just visualize that one of their expanders or fragment expanders. They could reflect on even just the feeling of what it's like when your self-worth is high, when you're in your full deservingness. Just remember a time that you did feel like that and try to embody that. So remember it and feel it in your body. What else do you think people could do in that time, given your energetics and hypnotherapy?
It's so interesting that you say that, because what I used to do with this practice, and we're giving you a real shortcut if you've been really busy lately, you know what I mean? Like, we sent out this quiz this month trying to figure out what people, or not figuring out, but they could figure out what their DI style is, whether they're habit stackers, the person who is really good at sticking a new habit in and doing it daily, or if they're intuitives. And with no surprise, most of our community is intuitive, meaning they wake up that day and they kind of see what they need. They're not great at following following a regimen. But with that said, this is really good for those days when you're in an intuitive mode and you haven't gotten a chance to do the work. I personally used to, when I was doing it way back when, I would use it to rework out tests I had had in the day. So like finding a new path around them. I would use it to also, like I'm using it right now, for instance, for birth. So just really showing my body what it's going to go through and communicating, like the opening of everything and all of that. So basically, I would take anything that I knew was coming up in my practice. Tests would be a really big one that I was struggling with a lot. And I would kind of look at what's going on energetically there. And it felt like I had more access in that time to be more intuitive if I didn't fall asleep right away, to pass them or get the information of how to pass them. I love that you mentioned expanders, really kind of looking for your expanders. I love that you mentioned embodiment while you're doing it. How does it feel in your body? And so I think that there are many ways you can tackle this based on what's coming up in your practice that you might not even be aware of. This is often the time, kind of like meditation, that I will get pings of what needs to be addressed in my practice. And then you can use that space to either rehearse or to work out the kinks of what needs to be done for the next step of your practice. So if there's a block that becomes available to you that you really realize the root of it, just taking, 3 or 4 minutes to kind of do your own little inner child work around it. If you've been doing this work, you're familiar what those DIs are like, going to that memory and changing the emotion around it and having a healing. So I feel like there's so many ways you can tackle that little bit of space and then throw your unblocked remedy on top of it. And here's a real shortcut for a month of what you could be up to.
I think that makes so much sense because I think of the times where I've laid in bed and all of a sudden I'm like channeling all of these ideas and things to do. And I'm like, okay, I got to get a notebook out. I don't want to lose these ideas. Or even this morning, I had a ping come to me right as I was just really slowly waking up. I was like, oh, I need to do this right now, and jumped out of bed to go do it. So it makes sense that we're almost more open to receiving sort of what our subconscious is trying to communicate with us.
Yeah, I like what you both said. I love the idea of reflecting on tests, whether you pass them or not, just to have that time for reflection. But I was also thinking, and you kind of said it at the end, what's the one thing I really need to focus on tomorrow? If you put that into your brain just before you fall asleep, you'll wake up completely primed to manifest that.
That's amazing. So I'm quickly interrupting this episode to invite you, if you're ready to start your manifestation journey, or if anything you've heard in our manifestation episodes has piqued your interest to begin. We have a la carte workshops in everything from the basics bundle, which is what we recommend to everyone who starts. It's the formula that actually teaches you how to manifest, unblocked inner child, and unblocked shadow. We also have a la carte workshops on love and money. But the real gem is the Pathway membership because it encompasses every single workshop we have. It's a year-long membership with full access to the few a la carte offerings we have and exclusive workshops not available anywhere else, such as the daily practice, which is what everybody in the Pathway uses, hopefully at least 3 times a week to daily, in order to truly create the new neural pathways that one needs in order to manifest, and houses the library of our deep imaginings, which is our unique hypnosis process that allows you to get into your subconscious and overwrite those old neural pathways, creating the new ones. You can use our special code EXPANDED, all caps, EXPANDED, to receive $20 off your first a la carte workshop purchase or $20 off your first month of the Pathway. Again, that's all caps, EXPANDED, EXPANDED. Okay, now back to the episode.
So one other piece I want to touch on with self-esteem, which I think is actually pretty applicable to our work, I sort of see the self-worth and worthiness as the innate. We're peeling back the layers to get back to our innate worthiness. But there's this other element of self-esteem in a lot of different articles I was finding, which is it being the reputation that we acquire with ourselves. So if we act in opposition to what our, let's say, moral compass is, or what our values are, or what we desire, we're actually hurting our self-esteem because we're telling ourselves that we can't trust ourselves. And I think this connects to the action steps you take in manifestation and how you move to pass tests. Not saying to pass a test, spiritual bypass it. If you need to move through it and still fail that test, then by all means, move at the pace you're going to move. But I think there's something to, this is the person I want to be. This is what feels most authentic and aligned to me. And then here are my actions. Are they lining up with what I'm actually doing? If I want to have a spiritual practice, am I making the 5 minutes to do it, or am I not? And something for me clicked, which was every time I'm not honoring myself by following my authenticity or my intuition or whatever it may be, I'm actually harming my self-esteem because I'm telling myself I can't trust to do what I desire to do. Does that connect from a neuroscience standpoint, Dr. Tara?
It connects, but I want to be really cautious about the wording for the same reasons that we discussed deservingness, which is perhaps just to say that harm is temporary. So yes, you can cause harm, but I don't want anyone to go away feeling like, it's then permanent. And I think actually a lot of the healing is to do with letting go of the emotions that come up with the memory of it, or the act itself, which we've spoken about before, where we've discussed reprogramming memories. And we've really been very clear and said, you're not changing an actual memory in your head, but you're changing the emotion that comes up that triggers you about that time in your life. And this is kind of similar.
So it's kind of like, we have a good post on it, but like your emotions fluctuate with the highs and lows, but your sense of self-worth can remain steady. It's kind of like that concept.
That's true, but your self-worth can also fluctuate. So, both scenarios are true. Yeah.
I think sometimes people attribute then their self-worth to their emotions. How can they begin to separate? Like if I'm in a sad mood for the day, I might feel sad about myself. My worthiness might feel low, but that doesn't necessarily need to be the case. I can kind of accept that my emotions are here, but I'm not going to be stuck here or be here forever. How can people start to sort of differentiate between a low feeling or a low self-worth?
I can definitely chime in on this. I've been really open about this through pregnancy, that I haven't been consciously the most worthy person throughout this process. It's at all. It just based on hormones alone, which we've talked about, I think, in quite a few episodes, this exact thing. But from a manifestation perspective, what I will say is that my subconscious is so primed from so much work. And I think that it really definitely loops on deservingness and self-worth for the most part, that I've been able to manifest so many things during this pregnancy, even though the many things I've mentioned, that I constantly worry that Max could be having an affair, which is like completely not realistic whatsoever. That I'm unattractive is a really big one that comes up, especially later in pregnancy now for me. Just being so vulnerable and tender is a whole new realm for me I've never experienced before. So I would say like consistently through pregnancy, I've been in a micro place of low self-worth. But what's so interesting is even though I would say what I'm going through is a transition more into my feminine vulnerability. If you want to call it like integration, I'm integrating a lot of my feminine that I've never been able to access before, which is a really sticky, scary, raw thing to be doing for 9 to 10 months consistently without any control over it. However, I'm still incredibly magnetic and manifesting. So the only thing I can credit that to is that on a subconscious level, my baseline is deservingness and self-worth at this point.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things there. One is to say that whenever these things fluctuate, whether it's our mood, our emotions, our worthiness, there's always a hormonal correlation. So obviously something like pregnancy is specific sex steroid hormones. But let's say somebody went through a breakup or lost their job, then the stress hormone cortisol will be dysregulated, and that will have an impact on their mood, emotions, and worthiness. So yeah, I just wanted to clarify that really, that, you know, there's always hormones involved. And for that reason, stabilizing your biology is quite an important thing to do alongside the sort of mental and emotional work that we do. And you'll notice that so much in the next year as well, as you go through different stages of how you have to attend to your baby. That baseline that I mentioned that you can't go below, you can improve on it, but you can't go below it. Yours, through all the work that you've done, has stayed at a really good level. But it's also making me think of, like, after I got divorced, that it was stressful. I was sad about what had happened, but I remember feeling like I'm still quite a happy person though. And just this whole conversation is bringing up, I had a beautiful but tiny apartment that I lived in for a long time on my own. And I don't think my self-esteem has changed at all, like from living in a tiny apartment to living in a bigger house. So there's definitely that baseline that's ours, even at a challenging time. And I agree with you that all the kind of work that you've done has led you to remain very magnetic, even through a biologically challenging time. Like I felt in 2020 that all the work that I'd done on resilience and neuroplasticity really helped me through that difficult year.
Yeah, I'm glad that you say that, because I really feel from a manifestation perspective, and again, I just want you listening, whomever you are, wherever you fall on the spectrum, you can build. I had no self-esteem really when I appeared to on the outside back in my early 20s, but on the inside, I was the most low self-worth that I had ever been in my life. I would say that was the overriding loop that was definitely being projected, and I built, and I think that once I figured out how to build it accurately, I could build it rather quickly. Even what you're saying, Dr. Tara, like this last year, these last 9 months, not only have they been a hormonal wildness, but the stress that I've had to overcome from circumstances of, which is very privileged, but of our house remodel and getting pushed around by contractors and taking advantage of, it's just been, the team's watched me. It's been like a constant thing. However, still able to manifest and be magnetic. And again, not to, go on a tangent with this, but all of this is divinely also happening to me, I believe. I'm going through rock bottoms, and I'm going through right now massive shedding in my life. Not only do I think it's creating space for one of the biggest manifestations I've been calling in, which is a baby, but also for the other conscious or unconscious smaller manifestations I've been calling in. The universe is like, cool, we're going to earthquake you a little bit, and we're going to get you on your authentic path because you're not doing it quick enough for yourself. Again, I have to attribute that to that baseline, because the universe only shows up where you're at with you. And that may be nothing at times, because you're not unblocked, expanded enough, and in your worth enough for something you're calling in. Or it may be the crazy turmoil that I went through in the last 9 months, and certainly many people went through in 2020. The universe is really here showing up in a different way, because you are. Even when you put in the smallest amount of effort of unblocking and expanding, it's bananas what starts to show up in your life. May it be tests to manifestations. That is you moving energy around for the universe to meet you. And what you're essentially doing is chipping away at your authenticness and your deservingness, which we say self-worth a lot.
I just want to say before I forget, because it just immediately raised a little flag in my brain, which is that you look more beautiful than ever in your third trimester.
I keep getting people who say, I was just up at the Forest House for 2 days setting up the baby stuff. And in the store, I mean, I couldn't even get out of there without so many people talking to me and saying those things. And it's so funny. So I'm so grateful to receive that and hear that. And I've been hearing that from many people, and that helps.
Good. Yeah, I just had to officially say it. I thought it, but then didn't say it.
Thank you.
So when you have a few manifestations kind of, come through, it always feels quite cumulative because obviously you become more magnetic with each one. So I think that's a really nice feeling to try to hold on to as well when perhaps you're in the magic dark. And so that's another thing that you could do when you're, lying in bed at night or first thing in the morning is just recall some of the manifestations that you've successfully had and whether they came in a little run of 2 or 3 or something. Yeah, and I was also thinking, I mean, in terms of creativity and manifestation, you're basically the embodiment of creating a whole new human. So,
yep. And like the vortex it's creating, which is so special and feels so out of control at the same time, but just magical. And I love that you made that note about, how you can spend those minutes before falling asleep, because also with that, just to build on it, looking at your personal patterning is so powerful during those times. Like you were saying, Jessica, and I was saying that you have a little bit more clarity or access intuitively into your beings to start to recognize your personal patterning. And when I say that, I've talked about it a lot, how you tend to manifest. So this is such a great formula for you to learn. And then you start to figure out your own pattern. So what I mean by that is like when I receive a ping, the way my intuition comes in is I'll get chills down my back. I can smell someone. My personal patterning is different than others. When I'm manifesting, usually having to do with money or love, the tests are very similar and they come in very similar ways. And that's how I can recognize, something big's about to happen financially or relationally. So that's a beautiful time to reflect on what does your personal patterning look like in the past, like what Dr. Tara was saying, when you've manifested in a cluster of 3s, how did it all come? And has that happened to you before? Because that's what your personal pattern will always look like. And that's really powerful to recognize and reflect on.
My Capricorn sun is just like, concrete example. How do I distill this down? So what I'm hearing, I'm like picturing a wave chart in my head. And so essentially just really surmising kind of what's going on with the layers of self-worth. It sounds like we have a baseline of self-worth, right? Which we don't dip below. And we're working to always raise that. And that seems to be kind of like the most concrete place of where we manifest from. And then we have sort of this daily self-worth that ebbs and flows. And if we honor it and it's high, it's going to help lift our baseline. And if it's low, then our baseline will kind of help us out and it'll bring us back up. And those can bring situational magnetism. But the idea is that over time, those sort of daily highs and lows of self-worth are helping to raise that baseline. And the baseline's never going to dip low after wherever it is raised to.
I often say I'm astounded by how quickly you do these summaries. That was a really good one.
I'm like, how do I see this in my head? Like, I need something more tangible. Okay, that feels really good. And that also feels like now I understand how situational magnetism works with those bursts of high and low, where our baseline is like really where we're manifesting everything from and really communicating to the universe from.
Yes. And that's a key thing to remember. I'll see this sometimes in comments and stuff like that, where it's like, I'm in a real rut, I'm in a real slump. But if you've been doing the work to raise that baseline of self-worth, don't worry. The universe is going to at some point knock you so hard off your rut or rock bottom that you're going to get it, whatever the universe is trying to connect you with. It's something you've been calling in consciously or unconsciously. If you're going through a really hard time, which again, I know that that's painful and so much comes with it, but you wouldn't be experiencing it if you weren't aligning and the universe wasn't helping you align with something that you deserve and are asking for. So recognizing that when you're doing this work and this process, in the pathway, or even if you're just doing it with the basics bundle or whatever, that's what you're working on. You're working on your baseline, and it's giving you all the tools you need to not only remove what is making your baseline lower through nurturing, like we talked about, through programming. So it's removing those blocks, but also through expanders and expansion, the tools you're doing inside of the pathway are creating space for your baseline to raise, essentially, to have the moment, to see, to believe many times that I'm worth more than where I'm at. I'm worth what that person has, embodies, or is successful in, etc. And then that baseline is going to start to give you the confidence, self-esteem, if you will, to pass tests, to be resilient to things like ruts and rock bottoms. That's how I see it.
I see it exactly like that. And as you were both speaking, I kind of suddenly had this visualization that your baseline is like the seabed and your worthiness is like the tide.
Beautiful. Yeah, but this is a new term we'll have to use, your deservingness baseline.
Yeah.
I love it. We'll get Grace on the graphics.
Yeah. Grace stat. She already is so in her, her baseline's so strong that she'll get it.
I thought you were going to say she already owns the domain.
That's a really funny inside joke for anybody listening. So our marketing director, she is like notorious for the moment she has an idea, she goes and buys the domain name for it. It's like her version of doing stocks. Like she'll get a ping of when to sell it, and bam, like she'll sell it for $4,000 or something a couple years later. So yeah, it's hilarious. Yeah, she probably, after listening to this, already owns that domain now. So run out and buy it.
One other thing that I kind of listed out too of ways we can build our self-worth through this work. We've mentioned many different ways throughout this episode, but clearing the programs and attachments modeled to us in the inner child. So that's helping get rid of whatever told you weren't good enough, all of those things. Unblocking in shadow to fully accept yourself. And accept doesn't always mean liking every aspect, but to experience yourself without denial of yourself or suppression or avoidance of yourself. And then starting to honor your needs and holding your boundaries through unblocked boundaries. That's when it's like, okay, now I have this new baseline of self-worth. Let me go out and put it into the world and see what the action is like. And then it's taking action that aligns with your values, your desires, your integrity, your authenticity. And then this other little tip that I added in there as well, which was the humility to accept accountability instead of blame others, and then course correct your action. Being able to accept accountability for your own life and then trust and have the esteem and self-worth that you know how to solve the problem from here, or you can handle your emotions from here, and trusting deeper into yourself.
And I know we've covered this in another episode, but how quickly can expanders help build your baseline, Dr. Tara, through seeing to believe?
I think pretty quickly and quite strongly, because that's a huge part of how the brain works in terms of your actual capability. And, on Instagram, we always use the example of Roger Bannister, the first human to run a mile in under 4 minutes, that as soon as he had broken that record, which we didn't believe was humanly possible, several other athletes were able to do the same thing in the next few months. So that's a very tangible example. But, I know that the first thing we can do to improve our self-worth is focus on our own past successes. So when we start to feel like I'm not sure if I'm going to get that job or I deserve that pay rise, then if we think about times in our life before that good thing has happened, and now we take that for granted, that's one thing to do. But if it truly is something that you've never experienced before, that's where the expanders really come in. Because, and I'm saying this from the neuroscience, and it's actually coincidental how it was on the workshops before I worked on it, which is finding somebody that's like you, that's achieved the thing that you want. because just knowing that it's happened makes it more likely that you're able to manifest that.
Yeah, and I'm going to start talking about this a lot more, because if you find yourself in a position, like we talked about, where you don't have that creative space or creative time, especially if you're a pathway member, let's say, and you're like, I'm a mom, how do I fit this in? We see that so much. Take 5 minutes and please go to the motivation. We'll have it linked below. Anybody can do this. Anybody can access it. It's totally free. It's on our website. Please read 2 to 3 testimonies, because the way that they are set up, especially like we keep revamping them, we're not doing it for sales and stuff like that. Obviously that's helpful, but we're doing it literally to provide expanders for you. So if you're somebody who's having trouble expanding, when you click on the motivation, you're going to get to the place where it says many different categories, whether you're focused on career, love, money, items, wellness, home, travel, videos. And then there are things from the coaches and podcast episodes that you can listen to. But when you click on, say, career, you could scroll forever going down here. Please read 3 of them, because the way that it's set up, let's even just take, I'm going to click on one of the top ones that are accessible now. It says the perfect buyer. You click on that one. When you're in there, you have a photo. If you identify with this person in any particular way, that's already going to be helpful for you, because you're seeing to believe that you're similar. And then they start to go through, what did you manifest? What workshops did you do to unblock and get there? What expanders did you find and how? What tests did you face? Which did you pass? Which did you not pass? It goes through that. How did your manifestation come through? How long were you in a magic dark? I mean, reading all of this is quick, and it's going to be a way to be a shortcut, similarly to what we're talking about before you're falling asleep. It only takes a few minutes. You don't have to drop into a long DI, though, of course, you're going to read a lot about how people did that to manifest. It's such a quick way to start building this baseline if you don't have a ton of creative space at this very moment in your life. And I would argue that the more you begin to read these, the more that creative space is going to naturally manifest and open up for you to have. May you be calling in extra support. May you be calling in, and when I say extra support as a mother, maybe that's an aunt that starts to take care of the baby twice a week, or the kids, or whatever. I think you will naturally start to manifest more creative space to therefore start to build your practice from there and have time for DIs and really going deeper.
Such a cool tool and resource. Well, thank you guys so much. This has been so expansive as always. I'm already thinking about this worthiness chart in my head.
maybe you can draw this out for Grace to make a graphic.
Yes, perfect. Thank you guys so much. It was so expansive. I've learned so much, and I hope you all did as well. We'll see you next time.
See you next time.
See you.
Bye.
And our 5-star review winner for the month of December is Hello, Nicolette. Nicolette writes, seriously life-changing. 1 year after listening to my first episode of this podcast, I can confidently say that TBM has changed my life. I've listened to every single episode of Expanded. I look forward to a new one each Friday. After binging several episodes, I decided to purchase a membership to the Pathway. Lacy's work has transformed my life in ways I could never have imagined. I successfully manifested a flexible, creative job, a move to Europe from California, my dream studio apartment, a new friendship, and countless number of material things, from specific clothing items to an entire summer's worth of free iced lattes. Okay, that is my kind of manifestation. But the most rewarding result, as cheesy as it may sound, is my newfound relationship with myself. I have reached a place of peace and confidence with my body image, something I never thought possible. Hello, Expander. I have found a newfound confidence in my creative voice as an artist, and my self-worth and boundaries are insanely strong. This podcast was my door into TBM and began a truly life-changing journey that I'm thankful for every single day. To Lacy and the entire TBM team, keep doing what you're doing because it is utter magic. Thank you. This is such a sweet message, and I'm so excited for this member. Just write into our intercom or write us at hi@tobemagnetic.com to claim your 1 year free membership to the Pathway. And happy manifesting, everyone. 2022 is going to be a beautiful year for you all. let's lean in and enjoy and take in the life that you deserve.